Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The Crow Tribe is marking a bittersweet milestone as its foundational treaty with the United States turns 200. The tribe solidified a peaceful relationship with the federal government, but gave up vast expanses of land. This year also commemorates 170 years since the treaty establishing the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indians was signed. Another exchange of land for peace and promises on into the future. We'll look at the legacy of these treaties as much as 2 centuries later. That's coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. Many clean energy initiatives across the country have been hit hard with federal funding freezes and abrupt cuts in recent months. But 2 villages in Alaska are considering a project that would harness the energy of ocean waves, potentially for the first time in the U.S. Ayolna Naiden with the Alaska Desk has more.
Waves gently hit the shores of Kachemak Bay as ravens croak above on a cloudy night in July. The small village of Port Graham is nested here at the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. The village may soon convert wave energy into electricity. Danielle Malchev is the first chief of Port Graham.
I have a lot of hope that this is going to be something great for our community.
Chugachmute is a consortium that serves native tribes, including Port Graham and its neighbor, Nanwalek. The consortium announced it had partnered with an Australia-based company, Carnegie Clean Energy, in May. Carnegie has several wave energy projects across the world, but this would be the company's first commercial installment in the U.S. That's according to Louise Richardson, Carnegie's commercial analyst.
One thing at Carnegie that we hope our technology will be able to service in the future is remote communities and isolated communities that might not have access to other forms of renewable energy options.
Port Graham and Nanwalek have no roads connecting them to the rest of the state. Energy costs there are high because the villages are at the edge of the grid and diesel for a backup generator comes on a barge. The electrical lines running from Homer are several decades old, don't have enough capacity, and are unreliable. Malchev says the village loses power several times a month in winter and once every few months in summer.
We have to use satellite phones if our power is out, which isn't very convenient when you're trying to relay and talk to doctors in the ER and you're dealing with a patient.
Malchev says more reliable electricity from wave energy could solve some of those issues. And ideally, the villages can sell any extra energy back to the grid and use that revenue on healthcare and education. The plan is to place a wave energy device offshore from Port Graham. Permitting, testing, and installation of the project might take close to 5 years. In Anchorage, I am Alona Naiden.
Back in February, President Trump tapped a Navajo man to become the next Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrozio reports, the nominee is one step closer to being sworn in as a top-ranking official, second only to Interior Secretary Doug Burgum.
William Billy Kirkland III was Special Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs during Trump's first term. In his recent Senate confirmation hearing, Kirkland took credit for helping Trump establish Operation Lady Justice, a federal task force on missing and murdered indigenous peoples, and for inviting the Navajo Code Talkers to the Oval Office.
I think that President Trump and Secretary Burgum love and appreciate and respect Indian country. I think they care.
New Mexico Senator Ben Ray Lujan disagreed.
Do you think the administration cutting billions from national programs that support Indian country, Native American communities' lives lives up to America's trust responsibility?
Sir, I look forward, once confirmed, to working with you, your staff, this committee, and most importantly, tribal leaders to prioritize the money that Congress appropriates for the Office of Indian Affairs to make sure it's best and most wisely invested.
If confirmed, Kirkland would be responsible for upholding tribal trust and treaty obligations on behalf of the federal government. The Senate's August recess may be canceled to finish confirming dozens of Trump nominees. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrozio.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Arctic Encounter 2025, July 30th to August 1st in Anchorage, Alaska, to shape policy, investment, and innovation in the far north. Registration at arcticencounter.com, who support this show.
Support comes from AirTalk Wireless, where individuals who qualify for the Tribal Lifeline program receive an iPhone or Samsung device, unlimited data, calls and texts, and international calling. Learn more at airtalkwireless.com/NNN.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. 3 tribes are among those marking important historical milestones this year. The Crow tribe in Montana is commemorating 200 years since the signing of their first treaty with the United States. It set a foundation for a diplomatic stance with the federal government, but also affirmed hunting and fishing and other rights that carry on today. The Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Oregon and the Yakama Nation are both acknowledging their treaty's 170th anniversary. These 3 tribes gave up millions of acres in exchange for reservation land and certain assurances by the federal government. Today we'll get perspectives on these defining documents with tribal leaders and members. We also want to hear from you, of course. Is your tribe coming up on a treaty anniversary or a similar milestone event? Join us with comments and questions by calling 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. We've got the phone lines open right now. Joining us from Tucson, Arizona is Heather Whiteman-Runshim. She is an associate clinical professor and the director of the Tribal Justice Clinic at Rogers College of Law at the University of Arizona. She is Apsáalooke. Heather, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Thank you. Good morning to you as well.
Joining us from Walla Walla, Washington is Janine Gordon. She is the special assistant to the president for Native American Outreach for Whitman College. She's a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. Janine, good morning to you as well, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you. It's good to be here.
And our third guest joins us from the Yakama Reservation in Washington State, Stephen Salam. He is the executive secretary of Yakama Nation Tribal Council, and he's also Yakama. Stephen, good morning. Welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you.
Yes, Maitsky, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Heather, I want to begin with you. August will mark the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Crow Tribe Treaty of 1825. How significant is this document for the Apsáalooke Nation?
Well, the 1825 treaty is, of course, the first treaty that the Crow tribe signed with the United States. It took place during that sort of foundational era in our history that really marks when we were figuring out how we were going to interact with the different representatives from different European powers that had, more recently come into our territory, and what that was going to look like. So it set the foundation for how we were going to deal with the United States going forward. The 1825 treaty really was a treaty. They call it a friendship treaty, but I think the word friendship is really not super accurate for that. It's more an economic treaty. It's a treaty about normalizing relationships and expectations going forward. And we see that move on and be developed further in the 1851 and 1868 treaties that the Crow tribe signed with the United States.
Let's talk about the specifics of the treaty. What is some important language that's included in it?
In the 1825 treaty, well, it's a pretty general treaty. I think the terminology in that treaty is not, it's not super specific, but it talks about things like who's going to have the right to travel through our territory. And, it's one of the very early treaties that lays out sort of the responsibility for wrongs that are committed by or against Indian people in our territory going forward. And some of those things continue to be the most difficult legal issues that we're still trying to, work through today.
Mm-hmm. Now, early on, the Crow tribe established a diplomatic relationship with the United States. Can you talk about those early interactions? What were those like with the U.S. government, and how has that relationship evolved over the years?
Well, one thing that I think a lot of people don't think about is what life was like on the ground in, say, 1825 in our homelands. The United States didn't have the tremendous amount of power and influence that they have now, and our ancestors had a lot of agency in what they wanted to do. The United States was in some ways desperate to normalize relations with the Indian tribes, and so that power balance, certainly there was a power imbalance, and certainly there were factors that speak to some of the unfairness of the treaties. But I think we also have to remember that our ancestors had a lot of ability to craft and prioritize things that they felt were most important. And maybe we see that more definitively in the 1868 treaties, where, that's a point in time where the United States was, facing a financial crisis and didn't want to continue to pay for wars against Indian tribes and was really trying to find a different solution to meet its interests. And our ancestors likewise were at a period of time that I think things were changing so rapidly, and they wanted to find their priorities and cement those as well. So I think when we really look at the treaties, we have to understand the different factors and the different objectives that the parties to those treaties were really trying to prioritize.
Heather, the Crow tribe fought alongside the U.S. Army in some cases. How is that historical legacy regarded now?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask, but I think in our tribe, we're proud of our legacy of working to do the most with what we have. We were a small tribe, and we were facing a lot of really formidable enemies surrounding our territory even before the United States came. And when the United States came in, our leaders were aided by their ability to speak with their creator and receive visions and guidance that told them that we needed to work with this new entity that was coming into our lands and our realities. And so they worked with the United States for the most part. We, among many other tribes, were scouts for the U.S. Army in different military expeditions and military campaigns. My great-great-grandfather, White Man Rentham, whose last name I carry today, was one of the 5 Crow Scouts at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. But he wasn't alone, and the Crows weren't alone in scouting at Little Bighorn or most of those other military episodes in our histories. And I think people aren't always totally honest about that. They like to, say, oh, the Crows were the scouts. Well, there were Lakota people, there were Arapahoes, there were all kinds of other tribes that were also scouting for Custer. And so the more that we know our history and fully understand it, I think that puts us in a place to, as tribes, be more respectful with each other and think about how we work together in the modern era to accomplish the things that we're still trying to do.
And this, I think you said great-great-great-great-grandfather, I can't remember, but this relative
just 2
of yours.
greats.
2 greats, okay.
2 greats.
I'm curious, did he survive the battle?
He did, yeah.
Interesting. Heather, the Crow Treaty...
I would just want to add on to what, so the Crow Scouts were discharged by Custer before the fighting began because they had advised him that it wasn't a wise decision to go into the villages and to attack the encampment on the Little Bighorn on that day. And Custer didn't listen, and so he told the Crows, well, you're discharged, you're too scared to come, and the Crows were like, cool. I mean, yeah, we don't want to die. They were young men. These were young men in their late teens and early 20s, probably for the most part. So, if you look at what happened to Custer, you can say, well, it's wise if you listen to the advice from the Crows.
Yeah, that's a good little piece of history. I'm going to remember that, Heather. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, words to live by.
Yeah. Now, going back to the Crow Treaty of 1825, this wasn't the only defining treaty for your tribe. There's also the Fort Laramie Treaty and another treaty a few years later in 1868. But the Treaty of 1825, how did it lay the foundation for those other treaties? And talk more about what is included in some of these other treaties that the tribe signed.
Right. Well, the Treaty of 1825 is a fairly short document. It lays out, again, the acknowledgement of the Crow tribe being under the protection, existing within territory, under the control of the United States. So it lays out that diplomatic relationship. It places us under the protection of the United States. It lays out the tribe's agreement to allow people to come into our territory to trade with us. It sets the expectation that the United States will develop transportation infrastructure and similar things within our territory, and that wrongdoers among our tribe will be dealt with, and that the whites who commit depredations in the Crow territory will also be dealt with. So, some of those really early considerations and the things that really were going to cause the most conflicts were contemplated and thought about in that document. They're further developed in the 1851 treaty, where we have some, I think, more, a little bit more detailed description of what the expectations were for depredations or wrongs committed in the Crow territory by Indians as opposed to whites. And it also lays out in the 1851 treaty for the first time specific geographical boundaries for our territory. Those are shifted in 1868, in the 1868 treaty. So the 1825 treaty was negotiated and executed with the Crows in the Mandan villages. So we're visiting our sister tribe, the Hidatsa. Our leaders negotiate the terms of the 1825 treaty. Later on in 1851, the treaty, which is known as the Horse Creek Treaty, it was negotiated in an area adjacent to Fort Laramie in that same region. And the 1868 treaty later on was also negotiated in that same area around Fort Laramie, Wyoming. The 1868 treaty is really the most detailed treaty. It lays out a lot of the really important things going forward. It puts together a framework for developing reservation lands, for it's the first allotment type provision that we have for the Crows, where it talks about heads of family and individual Crows being entitled to have allotments of land to begin the development of an agricultural economy, a settled agricultural economy on the reservation. And it also lays out the obligations of the United States to provide, implement, funding, personnel, basically technical assistance to develop the reservation as an agricultural land base. And it also, very importantly, has Article 4, which says that we have the right to continue to hunt on unoccupied lands of the United States, which...
Okay. Heather, I'm sorry, we have to take a short break, but we'll be right back and continue the conversation.
Poetry, arts, music, and the future direction of Indigenous narratives are all part of the multimedia celebration of creativity at an upcoming festival in Montana. The inaugural gathering, called Indigipalooza, is a 2-day event with performances and panel discussions. We'll hear about the festival's goals to strengthen the power of stories in all their forms on the next Native America Calling.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We are looking at the treaty anniversaries for the Crow Tribe, the Yakama Nation, and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indians. We're examining the history and the significance of documents that continue to inform their relationship with the federal government. Does your tribe have a treaty with the U.S. government? If so, how does your community reflect on legal, political, and other provisions and terms outlined in that document? Please share your knowledge and insights by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have Heather Whiteman runs him on the line right now from Tucson, Arizona. And Heather, you're laying a lot of facts on our listeners here. I'm taking notes as fast as I can, and we had to go to break. But please finish your thoughts before we bring in some more interviews with some other Apsáalooke people.
Great. Thanks, Sean. I just wanted to sort of conclude what I was saying earlier by highlighting the 1868 treaty. And Article 4 of that treaty was the subject of a Supreme Court case just a few years ago in 2018 when the state of Wyoming had been challenging the tribe's ability to continue to exercise its Article 4 rights to hunt on unoccupied lands of the United States. In that case, it's the Bighorn National Forest, really important area to our people for longer than I think most of us can even guess. And our ability to hunt elk, elk are a big part of our diet to this day and really important for a lot of our families. So the state of Wyoming was prosecuting tribal members who had attempted to exercise their treaty rights, and they went through the Wyoming state courts and the criminal court system, and ultimately, after repeated convictions or failed appeals in the Wyoming state court system, the United States Supreme Court granted certiorari and heard the case and upheld our right to continue to hunt on unoccupied lands of the United States. So I just want to make sure that it's really important, that it's really clear that our treaties remain really important today. They continue to be a way through which we can meet our needs, our physical and spiritual needs, and that, they're viable. These rights are continuing. They don't end on their own terms in at least our treaty, and it's important to understand them and respect them.
All right. Thank you, Heather, very much. Let's hear now from Apsáalooke educator, consultant, and language advocate, Dr. Lanny Real Bird. He spoke earlier with producer Sol Traverso. Real Bird says the 1825 Crow Treaty was signed without proper translation and understanding of the Crow worldview. He also spoke about how the other Crow bands were not consulted in the treaty signing.
It is important that we're first being recognized as a nation. And as for the Crow people, for them itself is something that was maybe mistranslated because of the language. They probably used translators that weren't very literate in terms of communicating not only Crow language, but they were unable to decipher that language into proper and formal English. And at the same time, the complement of the Plains Indian Sign Language was subject to interpretation because some of those signs may have meant something else in another context that was misinterpreted by these interpreters who were paid by the United States. And this may have caused some irreparable harm to not only the Crow, but other treaties that were signed by other nations that were interpreted through fur traders that may be under the contract of the United States, maybe people who lived with the natives that weren't educated in proper English and probably fluent to semi-fluent in the indigenous languages. The interpretations of these treaties were taken into a favorable context of those contractors, mainly the United States and the military, to benefit their favor without the literacy of understanding English by the Crow people. At the same time, it is an assumption that maybe in mainstream today, the lack of the understanding that there were three nations of the Apsáalooke. There was the Mountain Crow, which had other leadership. There was the River Crow that occupied northern Montana, could be interchanged with the Big Hidatsa band of North Dakota region. And these River Crow also extended their territory into Canada between Lethbridge and Calgary. So you also have another band of Crow called the Kickinabelly, and they're an extension of the Mountain Crow that occupied primarily northern, a vast majority of northern Wyoming. So each of these sovereigns should have had their own treaty and recognized, and the extent of the agreement did not include the different bands of the Apsáalooke. They picked one group that may or may not have been selected as the formal spokesman, or he was representing one particular band, but he didn't represent the whole group of Apsáalooke people that extended through out of Montana and camped with the Grobon and some of the people up north, and sometimes were on friendly terms with the Piikani. they were a different nation than the mountain crow. So you have to realize that maybe because of the interpretation, the people who translated, the subjectiveness of sign language, and that at that time there were three nations of Crow, that the Friendship Treaty itself might not have included a consensus or any type of compromise that other chiefs and other bands of Crow had at that time. Maybe with these factors that it is possible that, this was a very extreme violation of not only the sovereignty itself of the one band that they interacted with, but with all other nations in Indian country.
That was a taped interview with Apsáalooke educator, consultant, and language advocate Dr. Lanny Real Bird. An extended version of this interview will be posted on our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Heather, I want to ask you about the mistranslations to Crow leadership that Dr. Real Bird mentioned. How common were translation problems during these treaty signings?
Yeah, I think the translation issues that Dr. Real Bird raises are very real. That's something that we hear with respect to many, many treaties, not just the Crow treaties, but others. If you think about the logistics of negotiating a treaty between, for example, the Crow tribe and the United States, there isn't a common language that both of these parties speak well. And even finding translators to work in English and translate English terminology into Crow, legal terms of art and really sophisticated concepts was probably impossible, right? And that doesn't excuse the oversights in doing so. But if you think about how many layers of translation are taking place there, there's usually English into a sign language or maybe into a jargon, a trade jargon, and then from that into the native language or maybe even another language and then into the Crow language. So there's multiple layers of translation. And of course, we've all played telephone. We know that a lot gets lost in those repeated, transitions and exchanges. So the translation issue is a big one. It's present in nearly every treaty issue that we have. And that's why I think over the years, the courts have developed what we call canons of treaty construction. And that's rules for courts to use when they're trying to resolve these conflicts about what a treaty meant or what is required for the satisfaction of treaty terms in the modern era. And so the canon to interpret treaties includes that we will assume and we will apply the meaning of the terminology that is most favorable to the Indians, and we will do everything we can to figure out what the expectations and understanding of the tribal parties to the treaty were and apply those before we would apply, say, common language dictionary definitions and maybe even some legal terms of art. Okay. So that's one of the canons for determining what treaties mean today that are used by courts of law. And it's, really, I think, a reaction and an acknowledgement of the difficulties and the challenges and maybe some of the bad intent that some of the United States agents may have had in those negotiations, or glossing over things or changing language after the fact, or writing it in a way that was maybe more favorable to the United States because nobody could double check. They didn't have a tribal attorney on retainer to look at a final draft and send it forward. So yeah, those are some of the things that we still deal with today.
Fascinating. Thank you, Heather. Let's hear another perspective from the Crow tribe. This is Jim Real Bird. He was an organizer for the 1825 Treaty Commemoration event. Here he is talking about how Crow leaders like Red Plume came to the decision to strike an agreement with the U.S. government.
Red Plume was the leader that signed for the Mountain Crows. And the other River Crow was the other band that lives north of us towards the Canadian border, along the Missouri and stuff. So he didn't want to sign. His name was Sore Belly, and he never really liked white people. But Red Plume, he understood that there's changes coming. So that's how he received in his vision. And when he fasted and he went without food and water. Besides war medicine, how to stay, how to prosper with that lifestyle at that time. He received also the leadership, the ability to see changes in the future. And that's how decisions were made, and being able to foretell that there's a lot of people coming. So it's better to be able to have a relationship with these people that are coming instead of trying to keep them away from here, see? And I think mostly a lot of that had to do with the intertribal battles. So when you have intertribal battles, sometimes you stopped battling and you had peace. And we've had times when we've camped with the Blackfeet. The Crows camped with the Blackfeet. Some bands of the Crow camped with the Lakota. So it wasn't all like the history books say, oh, one of those guys that came in 1800, he said, these Crows, they're not going to be Crows anymore because they got too many enemies around them. Their warriors, a lot of them are getting killed because there's less warriors in Crow camps, and there's more camps around them that are fighting them and stealing horses. So the anthropologists back then said they're going to become extinct.
That was a taped interview with Jim Real Bird. An extended version of that interview with Jim Real Bird will also be available on our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Heather, I want to ask you that final quote there from Mr. Real Bird. Anthropologists back then said we were going to go extinct. Guess they got that one wrong, huh?
Yeah, they sure did. But I think what Jim said was spot on, that, there's this perception that all the tribes were constantly at war and that, there was nothing but fighting going on between us. And, those of us who are privy to oral history and the stories from our elders, we know that that's not true. Things were much more nuanced. So I appreciate him bringing that up. And I just wanted to also follow up a little bit on the point about the different bands of Crow. That in 1868, we had the Treaty of Fort Laramie that was ratified by Congress that went through, but there was a second treaty that was never ratified that would have established a separate reservation for the River Crow. So, there should have been a whole nother Crow reservation up in northern Montana that didn't ultimately end up being finalized by the U.S. by, congressional ratification or Senate ratification and establishment of the reservation. So, yeah, interesting facts.
Absolutely. Well,
and frustrating facts for our tribe as well, that, we weren't able to have our tribe recognized in its full complexity and all the bands appropriately dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Well, Heather, appreciate you coming on the show and clarifying a lot of this history. I've learned a lot, and I know our listeners are learning as well. And I encourage anybody to join this conversation. We are talking about treaty anniversaries for the Crow Tribe, the Yakima Nation, and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indians. The number to the Albuquerque studio, 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. I'll give it again, 1-800-996-2848. Let's get some calls going. I want to hear from some listeners. I'd like to hear your feedback with regard to some of these milestone treaties. Maybe your tribal community has one as well. You'd like to talk about it. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's talk more about the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla. And we have Janine Gordon, who joins us from Walla Walla, Washington. She is Special Assistant to the President of Native American Outreach for Whitman College. And Janine, 1855, the Walla Walla, Cayuse, and Umatilla ceded 6.4 million acres of territory to the U.S. in exchange for the Umatilla Reservation. Let's start here. How do you reflect on that as you mark this 170th anniversary of that treaty?
Yeah, Tatsumemi, good morning. Just wanted to share a little bit of background about myself before I answer the question. My my Indian name is Wild Carrot People, and I have a really deep connection to the Treaty Council of 1855 that was held in Walla Walla, Washington. My third great-grandfather, A.D. Pambrin, was an interpreter and signed the Treaty of 1855. My fourth great-grandfather, Matthew Dauphin, was also an interpreter and signed the Treaty of 1855. Those two men were French-Canadian traders, and they married into the Cayuse and Walla Walla tribes. So that's how they became my great-grandfathers. And then my fifth great-grandfather, Chief Pio Pio Mox Mox of the Walla Wallas, and my sixth great-grandfather, Chief Tuakakas Old Joseph, were both present and negotiating for our Walla Walla and Nez Perce tribes there. So the Treaty of 1855 is really significant to representation of our binding and legal agreement between the United States government and our tribal nations. So really defining who we are to each other, defining our relationship to each other, defining boundaries and reserved rights and responsibilities. So our treaty is crucial, providing knowledge and understanding about what our tribal sovereignty is, what land claims were about, how these treaties created our ongoing relationships between the United States and our tribal nations.
All right. Janine, we're going to take a short break. We're going to come back, and I want to ask you about your family connection to both sides of the treaty signing, but we do have to take a short break, and phone lines are open, so I encourage people to call in, 1-800-99-NATIVE, and please stay with us. We've got a lot more to talk about here today on Native America Calling.
Skugdash, amo ichukshag a walk, kamoy oiga apadak, him da go what se has urdak go to that wujut. Chpi match mahascho am the bite him, that taichum of the mahama winyo, da boy mgoka up we ida, amo ihachishiga amhealthcare.gov/coverage. O amo ihagugut am humoko gigi, sikor, wai kamoko, gigi gog, hutas pumuk jut, idop amjut him Medicare Medicaid hachipka.
You're listening to Native America Calling, and there is still time to join our conversation about the legacy and ongoing guidance of treaties, even centuries after they were signed. Join us with a comment or a question by calling 1-800-996-2848. We have Janine Gordon on the line in Walla Walla, Washington, and we're talking about the treaty that in 1855 was able to create the Umatilla Reservation. And Janine, you have a family connection to both sides of the treaty signing. Tell our listeners about it.
Yeah, so my grandfather, Lowell Wilson, had parents who were on both sides of the communities in the Walla Walla area. So we had a Frenchtown settlement that popped up just outside of what is now known as Walla Walla, Washington. So on the western side of the Walla Walla Valley. And so there's actually a Frenchtown historical site out there that people can visit and learn about the local history, which involves settlers coming into the area, and they were involved in the early trading business and married into the local Cayuse and Walla Walla tribes. And so two of those men married into the Cayuse and Walla Walla lineage of my great-grandmothers. And so that's how I am related to the two men who were at the Treaty Council of 1855 in Walla Walla as interpreters. And then the Cayuse and Walla Walla lineage goes back to Chief Pio Pio Mox Mox and Old Joseph of the Nez Perce tribes. So I am Cayuse, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce.
Okay. Interpreters. So that's fascinating. Earlier we were talking with Heather about translation, and do you know anything about that process? How those interpreters, like, how did they facilitate that back and forth, that exchange? And for example, this treaty signing, was any of that family history passed down?
Nothing specifically. We can only imagine, I guess, what it was like, and speculate, on the authenticity of the intent, of even the success of somebody who married into the tribe and learned the language per se. But you speculate, how well did they even know the language?
Right.
Yeah, and understand it. I mean, obviously they understood it enough to be an interpreter, but I believe that there were probably still challenges present in having real, thorough, authentic communication going on. Yeah.
Janine, what were some key historical events leading up to the treaty?
For the treaty with the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes, I think, after Great Britain and the United States were at the end of settling their disagreement over territories in the Northwest in the late 1840s, that opened up, like, the Western expansion, and people were like, yeah, let's go further west. And then they came into the Northwest. So our tribal nations were seeing more and more people move into the Northwest because of that agreement. And obviously there were cultural differences between the people moving into the territory and our tribal nations. Besides the cultural differences, there were the language barriers that we talked a little bit about. And those just created, clashes. They created increased tensions between the tribes and the incoming settlers. There's a very well-known historical story about Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, who came out as missionaries to the Cayuse, and the Cayuse actually welcomed them as guests and invited them to build their mission in the area that we call Waiilepu, which is just outside of the city of Walla Walla on the western side. And so when they welcomed them in and they began their mission, we had cultural customs. It was our way of living and offering a place to live within our territory and exchanging knowledge, exchanging land and resources. It was customary that things were given in return, right? A reciprocal relationship. And often those settlers did not understand that custom. Marcus and Narcissa Whitman did not understand that custom. And then there was the influence of, more settlement coming in that kind of changed Marcus's focus. And so that even created more tension. And that led up to the incident of what they call the Whitman Massacre. We don't like that word, but that's generally what has been taught in history. So we call it the Whitman Incident. But then again, a result of the settlement, a result of the measles epidemic wiping out half of our tribal population, and cultural differences.
Thanks, Janine. I want to also talk about the Yakima Treaty, and to do that, we have our next guest, Stephen Salam, who is the Executive Secretary of Yakima Nation Tribal Council. He joins us from the Yakima Reservation in Washington State. And Stephen, hello again. Thank you for joining the show. And let's talk about your tribe, who signed their treaty in 1855. The document included 10 million acres of land that the Yakima called home. How do you reflect now, 170 years later?
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. The way that I reflect on it is especially because of the role that I play in the job that I have now. I look at it as the start of a political relationship between the Yakama Nation and the U.S. government. It's the start of us ceding land and us reserving rights. And to this day, we still fight for those rights. I see that every day, fighting for land, fighting for our rights, fighting for our people and the resources on the land.
Well, let's talk more about that, because the tribe has been leading efforts to reclaim land that was taken by the federal government in the treaty. Is this an effort that the tribe will be involved in for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think getting the land back into the jurisdiction of the tribe is very important. I think we see throughout time that the only way that we can ensure that the resources will be available for future generations is ensuring that those resources and that land is under the stewardship of the Yakama Nation. We see a lot of movement into our land throughout history. I think one of the biggest ones is the energy sector. So we see the dams and we see the flow of the water, but just for the salmon alone, we've seen a decrease in salmon, and we've been working to bring that back. But we still see that through energy development projects that threaten our resources on our land. We're always fighting for those resources that can't speak for themselves and trying to maintain them for future generations. One of the things that I always tell people is that if you want resources to last till the end of time, give it to the native people, because we're the first ones on the land. We're going to be the last ones on the land.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, what were the circumstances in which this treaty in 1855 was signed, and what can you tell us about the leadership at that time?
So the treaty was signed down at the council at Walla Walla. It was, I think, one of the hardest things that I could imagine doing is ceding land. But it was done under duress. Even starting in high school, I've heard stories when I was younger about the council and the threats that went on. The Isaac Stevens threatened the leaders at the time that they would walk knee-high in their own blood and the blood of their people if they didn't sign this agreement. And so it was under duress, but even in doing that, they still reserved a lot of the rights that we have today that we continue to fight for across the board.
And what does it take all these years later to carry on, not just the fight itself, not just the legal and economic stakes that are involved, but just emotionally? What is the toll, Stephen, on the community to engage in? Again, I mean, this is 170 years ago, and you folks are still battling.
The fight is really hard. It's still not just dealing with the U.S. government, but even local governments in protecting our people. Sometimes we are treated as foreigners on our own land, or the people aren't aware that the tribe is here, or they feel like the tribe should do more when we're already doing a lot. It is a battle that I don't think everyone fully appreciates those efforts to make sure that we maintain those resources. And one of the more important things is protecting our people. I think one of the things that I've seen here in my role is jurisdiction. It's really hard as we have a patchwork of jurisdiction to protect our people and ensuring that they have the resources and the backup to make sure that they're safe and secure, along with our resources across our land.
And young people today in the community, do they learn about this treaty? Do they learn this history? Or even yourself, when you were growing up, did you learn this information in a school or at home or anywhere?
I learned a little bit of it at home. I learned a little bit of it at school. But it is something that I think needs to be more ingrained in Our public education systems on our reservation, we have a large reservation with 3 districts directly in our reservation. And I think it needs to be taught, and I've done that through our consultations with local school districts, emphasizing that, all of the school children that attend their schools should understand that they're on a reservation, that that this treaty was signed, understanding the legal background, not in depth, but just a basic understanding. Because I remember when I first moved back from college, talking to a middle school group with a school that I could see from our headquarters, and not all the students even understood that they lived on a reservation. I think we've come a ways from then, but it's always there's always more.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Janine Gordon, I want to go back to you because you spoke recently at an anniversary commemoration for the treaty. And I want to ask you, what did you share? What were your words with tribal members regarding the anniversary?
Yeah, thank you. I think, sharing my words with them at our treaty commemoration, I shared the importance of the commemorations that we hold, because it is an opportunity for us to come together as a community to remember the Treaty of 1855 and to honor our tribal chiefs, our tribal headmen, our tribal leaders who were there and negotiated for almost 2 weeks long to reserve rights for us that are active today, and just shared with them the appreciation that I had and have for our tribal leaders who really keep in their hearts and in their minds the care of our people, not just now, but in the future. And that's what our leaders did, negotiating in those treaties. And the treaty is what has held us. It's what's kept us alive since then. And our battles went from land battles to court battles, but it's keeping us alive. And I'm so proud, and shared with the people that I'm so proud of our tribal nation. And from that time to what it has become today, we're one of the largest employers in Eastern Oregon, and a leader in, tribal government development and self-determination, and pushing for our treaty rights. So another thing that I shared with them is that I see the treaty as a living document. It's not just a piece of paper, it's a living document, and then all of us as tribal members are the treaty itself.
Janine Gordon, President for Native American Outreach for Whitman College, joining the show today to talk about the Treaty of 1855. We also had Stephen Salam on the show from Yakima Nation Tribal Council, who also discussed the Treaty of 1855 from a Yakima Nation perspective. And we had Heather Whiteman Runs Him from Tucson, Arizona. She's Apsáalooke, and she was talking about the Crow Treaty of 1825. And of course, we had the pre-recorded interviews with Dr. Lanny Real Bird and Jim Real Bird as well. So we had a lot of great interviews on the show today, a lot of good information, and we can keep this dialogue going, folks. So please go ahead and check out our website where we'll have some of this content uploaded here shortly. Also, our Facebook page, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. We've got all the social media for you to engage with. Post, comment, like our show. If you've got suggestions for future topics on future show, we'd love to hear those as well. So please just continue the engagement with us here at Native America Calling. And don't forget, join us again tomorrow for a look at an upcoming celebration of Indigenous arts and storytelling in Montana. I'm Sean Spruce. We'll talk again soon.
More than a museum, the Alaska Native Heritage Center represents all Alaska Native peoples in a living cultural center where the traditions, languages, and arts of Alaska Native peoples come to life through cultural programming and exhibitions, life-size village sites, live performances, demonstrations, and dynamic exhibits are all just minutes from downtown Anchorage. Open 7 days a week, there is always something new to discover at the Alaska Native Heritage Center who support this show. More at alaskanative.net.
Chespukani. Map out your journey to mental wellness. Our culture is a source of strength as we navigate uncertainty. Need to talk with someone who can help you tap into that strength? Contact your local Indian healthcare provider. Visit healthcare.gov/coverage or call 1-800-318-2596. A message from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.